got no way I'm going. There ain't got no way, ain't got no way I'm gonna make it without my Lord. No, ain't got no way I'm gonna make it without my Lord. No, ain't got no way I'm gonna make it without my Lord. No. There ain't got no way, ain't got no way I'm gonna make.
So, welcome to this episode or edition of Breaking Out of Depression. I am your host, Andy Charles, and your brother in Christ. I'm a certified life and development coach, public speaker, minister of the gospel, author, and singer. And yes, God has blessed me with so many gifts. So I owe him a great deal, a great ROI on the investment that he made by putting me here on this planet. This episode, you will see later on, probably the pre recorded version of which it will be now, especially since we're going to be live. And we encourage you to please tell someone, tell a friend, invite a family member. Anyone could be struggling with depression, anxiety, disorder, grief, you name it. All these things that we have challenging us on a daily basis in our lives. And here's the thing, we're here to help you with that. We're here to give you information, encouragement, advice, counsel, whatever you choose to call it. All the good stuff, all the content that is available, the valuable quality, the experience of the people, the expertise of the people, it's right here on Breaking Out of Depression. Enough talk. Time to introduce our guest. She is an amazing guest, and her name is Dr. Tonya Cunningham. She's known as the Grief Doctor. And today we have the privilege of introducing our guest, who's not only a leading expert in grief counseling, but also a compassionate guide for those navigating the tumultuous waters of loss. Dr. Tonya is renowned for her expertise as a grief doctor and coach, and has dedicated her career to helping individuals cope with grief and find their way to healing, something that the world desperately needs today. Her approach is grounded in deep empathy and evidence based principles, making her a trusted figure in the field of grief support. From her extensive experience in personal counseling to her innovative programs designed to offer immediate relief, Dr. Tonya has been a beacon of hope for many, and her background and achievements tells us that she has a journey in grief counseling that began with a profound commitment to understanding and addressing the unique needs of those experiencing loss. As you can probably tell, I'm getting all excited about this at this time. So, without further ado, let's introduce our guest live here on Breaking Out of Depression, Dr. Tonya Cunningham. Welcome, and how are you?
Hello, Andy. Thank you so much for having me in this space. And I am doing well today. So glad to be here.
Glad to have you, and we welcome you, and we appreciate the time you're taking to be with us and you as the individual. So, did someone name you the grief doctor, or was that something that you decided to use so that people would know what your specialty is or your core competencies? How did you come about by that term?
Actually, someone named me that. It was a former coach that I had who was aware of my journey. And I actually started out as the grief coach. And then I received my doctorate in pastoral psychology and became the grief doctor. So someone else gave me that name.
Wonderful. I love it. Thank you for sharing. I want to get right into what I consider to be the meat or the heart of the matter. As you can
Mhm.
tell, we are quite passionate about helping people and bringing information that would give them inspiration and would lead to transformation so that they come out of the darkness into the marvelous light. And here's the thing, I think there are many, many misconceptions out there, Dr. Tonya, about grief
Mhm. Mhm.
and how it can be dealt with. And that's one of the reasons why we thought it very special to just bring you on. So, can you clear up some of those misconceptions for us? Help us define what grief means and how someone can know that they are in a
Mhm.
state of grief.
Mhm. Great question. Because what does the word tell us? And all of thy getting, get what? An understanding. What we
There
don't
you go.
understand, yes, what we don't understand, we can't bring about any transformation that you talked about. And I often say there can be no transformation if there is no application of the
Right.
information we receive.
Yes.
So,
Right.
what is grief? It is the internal, emotional, chemical response to an external loss. And it
Wow.
doesn't matter what that loss is. Most people think grief is just associated with death loss. It is not. It means separation. In the Bible, it comes from a word called lupa, Loopa, which means to separate, to feel pain. So every human being, all of us experience grief. And it was the pandemic that really caused us to understand that grief is something that happens on the inside of us, and absolutely everyone experiences it anytime you experience some type of transition or a loss.
Wow. So let me get this clear. It does not necessarily apply to someone losing a loved one, the physical absence of someone in their lives. It could be a love affair, it could be a job, it could be a house, it could be social status, it could be a loss of your investment. Is that what you're saying,
Yes.
Dr. Tonya?
That's exactly what
Wow.
I'm saying. And I love that list. It could be retirement.
Yeah,
You look for retirement, but once you get there, because you've lost the identity that you had, the social connection that you had, loss of health, loss of
yeah,
identity. Yes,
right.
that's what grief is.
And how can someone realize, come to the conclusion, recognize ultimately, I am in a state of grief?
Mhm. So when you start paying attention to what your body is saying, because what happens on the inside, that grief is on the inside. Listen to this, mourning is what happens on the outside of us. They're not the same. And what does the
Okay,
scripture tell us? Blessed are those that mourn, for they shall receive their comfort. So
yes,
the mourning is how we cope. So I want your audience to pay attention to what's happening in their body. How am I responding to things when someone just asked me to pass the ketchup, or to pass a fork or a knife, and I yell at them?
yeah,
Let's see what's going on there. A lot of times, grief can show up in different ways other than sadness. So, really giving attention to how they're feeling and what they're thinking.
wow. I love that. Thank you for sharing. And that opens up a whole new ball game in terms of our concept of what grief is, as far as its connection to someone who is understanding why this disconnect exists in my life, because I'm now in a different state. I'm in a state of reflection, I'm a state of transition. And the mourning
Yes,
is the outer aspect of where we cope, but the grief is the thing
yes,
that we suffer on the inside. Wow,
that's it.
amazing. Dr. Tonya, what are the set core things that you would begin to help someone to do so that they can manage themselves better, that the grief does not have a negative impact upon their lives, but helps them
Mhm,
to go to the next level, which may be necessary at the time?
mhm. You said a wonderful thing when you said help them to manage it, because the reality is, um, grief never ends. And I always slow down when I say that because I want people to know now the pain of grief will leave as you participate in your mourning process. So if I meet you 5 years down the road after your loss and you tell me that the pain feels just like it was yesterday, that tells me you have not allowed yourself to mourn. Okay.
Okay.
So again, with grief, you want to be able to allow yourself to first acknowledge where you are. Now, that may sound so simple, but in some cultures, such as the Black community or the minority community, most faith based communities, we haven't been given permission to say, I am grieving, I am hurting.
Uh,
We're taught
yeah.
to be strong, to
Yeah.
push forward and pray through. So I'm here
Mhm.
to encourage you. I want you to pray, but I also want to acknowledge that, oh my gosh, I am hurting. Because the reality
Yes.
is, Andy, every loss demands a response. That's what grief
Yeah.
is. So I want you to
Yeah.
acknowledge it. That is the first thing. Then once you acknowledge it, then do something about it. Out in the social media world, all of us know that the CTA, that's called a call to action. I
Yeah.
encourage people, there's a call to action when it comes to your grief. That means you've got to do something about it to get the proper help to help you navigate that space.
Wow. I love that. And this leads me to another aspect. How do how do we engage with the reality of accepting the grief? I ask
Mhm,
that because there are some people who constantly live in denial. They're feeling the withdrawal, they are experiencing the symptoms. Folks on the outside can see it, but they are
mhm,
trying to be strong. And as you just said, we are not sometimes given
mhm.
the space, the opportunity to just be human enough to feel what we were meant to feel, because it's a process and we have to
Absolutely.
go through the process.
Mhm,
So, how do
mhm,
we help people to get away from that imposter syndrome type of mindset and say, hey, wait a minute, this is real? I need
mhm,
to address it. I need to deal with it. Because later on down the road, there may be a price to pay that I cannot afford.
mhm. Absolutely. So, spaces such as what you've provided for us in this moment, that education, becoming aware about a subject that we're not familiar about. So, to bring context with that, it really depends upon when the loss happened and the type of loss that the person is experiencing. Because one can experience what is called normal grief, and then someone could experience a different type of grief called complicated grief. What would
Right.
make a person experience complicated grief? How the person died. If they died by violence, homicide,
Yeah.
suicide, that type of thing. If they were young, if they were away from the person when they died, all of these factors would complicate it. And that would certainly cause the normal grief process to be intensified or elongated. So I wanted to bring
Okay.
that in context. It depends upon when the loved one died and how they died. So, how do we help that person who is still in denial? It's
Mm-hmm.
important for us to know if they are in early grief, acute grief, or mature grief.
Right.
Acute grief is when the loss happens, acute care, it's right now. Early grief is the first 2 years of the loss. And beyond 2 years is what, again, David Kessler, he's another educator out there in the grief industry.
Yeah.
He calls it mature grief because I taught you grief
Okay.
never ends, but the pain of it does. So, someone who is
Yes.
in denial, I would need to know when their loss took place and what have they done to participate in it. Now, if they're
Yeah.
5 to 6 years down the road, normal grief, and they're still in denial, that means that they're not
Mm-hmm.
open to the process. They
Oh
must
boy.
be open to this perspective that I've experienced a life-changing event. My loved one is not here, or whatever it is that I lost is not here. And I must move into acceptance if I'm going to heal. Does that make
Wow.
sense?
Yeah, of course, absolutely. And it opens up so much more, a greater level of understanding of this simple but yet dynamic subject that we are speaking on. Yes, folks, Dr. Tonya Cunningham is in the house, and we're speaking about finding clarity in grief,
Mhm,
effective strategies for healing
mhm,
and relief. I
mhm,
want to ask her a question here for the audience, basically, and it is simply this: does grief in itself bring about some level of psychological and emotional repression for people? uh, in the sense that, can there be something that you would see happening with their mental state, their emotional state, that would alter as a result of them going through a period of grief? And they may not see it, but folks on the outside might recognize you're
mhm.
not so vibrant anymore. You're not doing
That's
the
right.
things that you continue to participate in. We're not going for walks anymore. You're not going to the picnic. You
Mhm,
you don't want to go to the show. You don't want to go to the ball game. Can we see those
mhm.
things happening in all at once as well?
Absolutely, it is certainly noticeable. Now here's another observation to make is that again, I mentioned the pandemic earlier. So much
Yeah.
happened during that time. Yes, we had a lot of pain, but so much good came out of it, such as awareness, and it brought this subject, like you said, this phenomenon about grief to the forefront. So a lot of people I've recognized after working in this industry for so many years don't even understand what grief is. So I love that you allowed me to explain that.
Yes, please.
But most people find themselves in that space of wanting to fix the other person. That's, not wanting to go outside. They're not doing the normal things that they want to do. That is
Yeah.
absolutely normal in grief. Now,
Okay.
here's the D word called depression. That's a big one.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
People of color, they run from that word. When I talk to people and I said, sounds like you got a little bit of depression going on. Oh no, I'm not depressed. I have Jesus. And I said, you have Jesus and depression because depression deals with the soul, but it
Yes.
doesn't mean that you have what you and I know to be clinical depression. That's what scares people. Those are two
Yeah.
different types of depression. Depression and grief is just sadness. That's all it is. It's just
Yeah.
sadness. And you won't remain there, but you do have to allow yourself to feel it because we can't heal if we don't allow ourselves to feel. So, yes,
Right.
we can look at other people and see, oh, that's a grief response. That's a grief expression. And I encourage people to bring it to that person's attention because sometimes they're not even aware that that anger or that sadness or that anxiety is associated with their grief. They think it's totally disconnected.
Wow. And it is not. Wow. This
No,
is an
it's not.
education, folks. And wow, we love it and we appreciate Dr. Tonya's presence. We are basically, from a cultural perspective, a community type of people, whether it's the church, the neighborhood we're living in, the schools that we go to, our social circles and cycles, the ball game on a Sunday evening, the family picnic, the family outings, whatever it is we
Hmm.
do, we love community, people just being
Hmm.
around and being together. How important does a role of the community play in dealing with someone who is going through a period of grief?
Having that community is vital to your outcome. It can definitely benefit your journey of healing, or it can definitely cause some problems down the road if you don't have sufficient support. So
Right.
I share with people assessing your network and don't feel bad if you don't have what I call sufficient support. That just means they're going to be introduced to you later on your grief journey. But
Okay.
healing takes place in community. Healing takes place in community. So we need other people as we go through this process to be there to pour into us. And the type of support that we have is going to be key because there's emotional support networks, there's practical support networks, there's informational. And so you have to know where your loved ones or friends fall because sometimes we can expect a family member or a friend to be emotional support, and they don't have the capacity to express and acknowledge their own emotions, so they can't give it to you in grief. So
Yeah.
having sufficient support, spiritual support, is important. That is very, very key and vital to your healing process in grief.
Okay, great. I love that. I love that. I really do. And so it leads me to think, let's say, for example, a family has collective grief scenarios where it may be an accident has taken place. I don't want to take this too far, but I want to keep it as practical and as simple as possible.
Okay.
We lost three persons of the family in the accident,
Mm-hmm.
and everyone is affected either by the loss of a wife, brother, sister, cousin, nephew, uncle, aunt, in laws, somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have to now come together, pull together, and support each other in the grief process. What are some of the
Mm-hmm.
key things that we can do as a family to maintain some level of functionality while we are dealing and grappling with the grief process?
Great question. So, the first thing that they would need to recognize is, in this scenario, they're not only dealing with grief, but they're also dealing with trauma because of
Right.
how many people died at one time. And I think you said a car accident, because not all grief
Yes.
is traumatic. Not all grief
Right.
isn't. So they're dealing not just with grief, but they're dealing with trauma, which adds an additional element that they must process to through and give attention to. So once you
Right.
identify that, and then also recognize in the family, although you are a family unit, everyone is going to mourn differently. You probably have heard a lot of people say, everybody grieves differently. Technically,
Yes.
all of us grieve the same because it's on the inside, but we mourn differently. So
All right.
when there's a collective loss in a family, it's very difficult or challenging at times because each family member is trying to get the other person to mourn the way that they do. And it doesn't happen that way. It can be very uncomfortable because one person is going to counseling or therapy, another person is expressing it well, then another person is suppressing. So the others that are processing, they want to get the one that's suppressing to talk about it. And that may not
Yeah.
be the way that they deal with life challenges. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
giving that person
Yeah.
space, each person to process and deal with it as they normally do.
Wow. I love it. So you can make your comments, you can ask your questions. We have Dr. Tonya Cunningham in the house, the grief doctor, and the topic is finding clarity in grief, effective strategies for healing and relief with Dr. Tonya Cunningham. Spirituality and religion are two separate fields, and somehow or the other, yet at the same time, they kind of complement each other.
Hmm.
But my focus, basically for me personally, is I love the Lord. The Lord is good to me. His
Hmm.
grace and His mercy and all these wonderful things. I'm grateful every day for Him. And His
Yes.
mercies that are new every morning. His grace is sufficient. And
Hmm.
His strength is made perfect in my weakness. According to
Weakness.
Second Corinthians chapter 12, when he was speaking to the Apostle Paul.
Yeah.
I have all these things, but still I reach a junction in my life where the love of my life has been taken away from me in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye. I didn't see it coming. I was not
Yeah.
prepared for it. When that
Yeah.
person comes before you, what is the first step that you help them to take in even trying to come to terms with the loss and then engage in the process of grief?
Hmm. It's for them to recognize that their divinity is not their humanity at
Wow,
all. Their
wow,
divinity, it's not their humanity. I was that same person too. I buried my baby,
okay,
my mother, my father. My mentor was brutally murdered 3 days before my wedding.
wow,
And I spiritualized every one of those losses and didn't allow myself to feel. It was a
Mm.
divorce that I went through 12 years ago from a guy who was also my pastor. That's what taught me all of this revelation that God has been downloading, because I said, oh my gosh, I've been spiritualizing all of that and not allowing myself to feel. So I would encourage
Mm.
that person, because here's what we're recognizing now in the body of Christ. That's why you notice that pastors all over the world are talking about mental health. They're bringing in
Yeah.
people. If they're not able or qualified to teach about the brain and the mind, they're bringing in people
Mhm.
to talk about that, because now we're
Yeah.
having to be held accountable to teach holistically, because we are spirit, soul, and body. So I would encourage
Yes.
that person. You haven't lost your faith necessarily, although some people do, and they gain it
Mm.
back because of the grief, but you've lost your joy, and that is absolutely okay. It is your soul that has been wounded because your loved one is not here. And what's a part of the soul? That's your mind, your will, and your emotions. And the word
Yes.
tells us that he restoreth my soul. That's not a one
Yeah.
time thing. So every time we go through a life issue that hurts us, that soul has to be restored. And it's restored not just through prayer. What we're doing right now is a restoration of the soul process, because we're helping them
Right.
deal with their emotions, their thoughts, and their will.
Yeah. Oh boy, I love that. Super inspirational. Thank you. So I'm just gonna go to a different section of this interview now. I want to put up
Okay.
something on the screen, and I want you to give some color commentary on what you're gonna see now. I got my marbles back. That's an ironic way to describe this publication. There is life after loss.
Mhm.
Could you help us to understand the process by which you came about, the naming of the book, and what's the deep message you want folks to get out of the publication?
Okay, so I just started. That was a great segue into this. I shared that I went through divorce and how that whole
Hmm.
process, it caused me to spiral downward, because I could
Right.
not understand. I was praying and asking God, what is going on here? So in the field of psychology, there is this colloquialism that says if you lost your mind, you've lost your marbles. And
Wow.
so my healing process began when I admitted myself into a mental health hospital after I was suicidal and I was depressed over that divorce. And and I went to outpatient therapy. I was inpatient for about 6 days, six nights. And then I went
Hmm.
to outpatient therapy, and there I saw a huge basket of marbles, and they were having a marbling out ceremony, like a graduation. They were giving us
Right.
marbles, or allowing us to choose the marbles that represent how we entered the hospital and how we departed. So that's where the
Right.
book came from. Actually, during my graduation, my marbling out ceremony, the Lord said, you got your marbles back. Now you're going to preach it, teach it, and share it with other people. And I'm running around this mental health therapy room saying, I got my marbles back and you got yours too. And I've been teaching it ever since. That's where it came from.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. What is the kind of response that you have gotten, if you're aware of it, from this publication? What is the feedback? What are people saying about it in terms
Hmm.
of what they're getting from it?
It has given people awareness,
Uh-huh.
peace, freedom, and understanding. Two testimonies stand out to me. One was a teenage girl at the time whose
Yeah.
father was absent. She was the daughter of a
Okay.
single mom, and she read the book, and it prompted her to want to have a conversation with her dad, because she didn't want
Okay.
to continue to experiencing grief because of that. And then
Yeah.
there was a former coworker of mine who was a nurse. She came to my book signing that night, and I think she said, yeah, she was of the Methodist faith. And she came into
Hmm.
my office the Monday after my book signing and said, I want to know that God that you know, the God that you
Ah,
talked about in this book. Please teach me about Jesus and God,
wow.
because they don't teach that in my faith. That
Okay.
has been the best response to me. Yeah.
Wow. I love it.
Mhm.
I
People are
love it.
coming to know God through me sharing
Yes.
my story. This is why it's
Yes.
important for us to heal so you can share that. All it is a testimony, a testimony.
Mm,
And the
yeah.
word tells
And
us
people,
we
yeah,
overcome by the
yes.
blood of the Lamb and the word of our
And
testimony.
yes, yeah, definitely powerful, amazing stuff. So, folks, we are in the presence of the grief doctor. The name is Tonya Cunningham, and we are finding clarity in grief and learning effective strategies for healing and relief with Dr. Tonya Cunningham. I want to take a little turn now and look at the aspect of what is happening in the world today. It's not
Mhm.
very encouraging when you look at what is happening with the economy, with certain countries, continuously being at war. There's so
Mhm.
much hurt that is happening, so much dysfunctionality with families and loved ones. And I understand now better the process of grief and how at times you can find something so unusual that people grieve over. I'm
Yes.
looking at someone who is just looking at the world and saying to themselves, it does not look as if it's a good thing to be here anymore. I've
Mhm.
met people like that. There's no hope for
Mhm.
them in the world. They don't see any
Mhm.
hope. Everything is black
Mhm.
and white, and it's either good or bad. But at the end of the day, like it's more bad than good, and there's this great imbalance. And they have this
Mhm.
negative connotation of everything that is happening around them. Have you had
Mhm.
the opportunity to deal with folks like that whose level of grief is just life itself?
Mhm. Yes, absolutely so. Definitely since the pandemic, many people, and we're living in what I call again the post-pandemic, even though COVID is still here and never really left, but many
Yeah,
people
yeah,
are grappling with the uncertainty of life. Because even if they didn't have a loved one or a friend to die from COVID, they still experienced it because we're all living in the world. So for people like that, I attempt to join their world. And what I mean by that is I ask them, uh, are you okay with sharing why you feel the way that you do? And a lot of times people who are in that dark space, they feel unseen and
yeah.
unheard. So I attempt to give them that space and praying along the way, asking Holy Spirit, guide me on how to deal with them because each person is going to be different and really to
Yes.
see where their headspace is. And then we can take it from there. Now, my experience has been once I see them and I hear them, they're open to getting help. I
Okay.
explain about grief, I validate where they are in their space. And then I share my story that I've been in a low place before because what they see now is they think, oh no, you've never been low. I have been
Ah,
low in depression and I came out of it victoriously. And you can do the same. And it's going
yes.
to take work. And I'm willing to accompany you on that journey as you do that work to heal and recover.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I love it. I love it. And it leads me to think about the impact that you can make on people's lives because it's a two-edged sword coming from you, Dr. Tanya. You've
Hmm.
had the experience and you
Yes.
also have the expertise and the knowledge combined together.
Yes, sir.
And it leads me to think, have you had feedback from people about the impactful changes individuals have come to you and said, my goodness, Dr. Tony, I've seen this, I've seen that, I've experienced this after working with you in dealing with their grief, specific things that they would have lined or outlined to you that has helped you
Mhm.
understand even better how you can deal with them in the process.
Yes, and I'm sitting here as you sharing that, just fighting back the tears because I'm ever so grateful that God can use any of us who
Right.
allows ourselves to move in submission. And I get those calls quite frequently on social media. Especially called to, or the people who receive me are people of faith because I've been open with my journey. And then senior citizens. I'm 58, so
Yeah.
I have fun with that and say I'm a part of the AARP. There's nothing wrong with getting
Okay.
old. You just don't want to look old. But a lot of middle agers are drawing to me because they
Yeah.
feel like life is over. And it's not.
Wow.
It
It's
is
not.
not. I'm holding fast to the word that says, my ladder shall be greater. And it can be
Yes.
if you are
Yes.
open to doing the work. Yeah.
Wow. Wonderful. What does the future look like for Dr. Tonya Cunningham with regards to the work, the development, the progress, the increase of her ability to help people and her core competencies, and even a certain level of fulfillment that she's currently obviously now feeling, but
Mhm.
realizes that more can be done in the future going forward.
More traveling. I do quite a
Uh,
bit now, but not to the extent that what I've seen. Andy, I remember when I first started 12 years ago on this journey after going through the beginning stages of my healing process, and I was in the airport and I was passing by a mirror and I saw myself and I heard God speak. I heard the Holy Spirit say, "You're going to be traveling a lot." I'm like, what? Me travel a lot? Had no idea. And I have
right.
been, but I definitely see greater travel to be able to reach more people. That is my goal. Doing group sessions
Yeah.
through coaching, inner healing, and deliverance as a way of reaching more people at one time. That's what I see. More books. I'm getting ready to come out with a couple of more books next month.
Okay. Okay. So we should go to the next one, seeing that I have it here, and let me put green for us.
Okay.
Grief work is
Okay.
essential, not optional. Let the healing continue. Tell us a bit about this.
Mhm. This is the sequel to the first book, I Got My Marbles Back. So this
I
one,
thought that.
yes, was written 5 years after the first one, and it was during the pandemic where we were
Wow.
quarantined. And I didn't realize I even had anxiety at the time, but the moment they said you can't go outside, I said, "Oh my God, I'm stuck in this house by myself. Oh, I'm gonna die by myself with my two dogs." I just went all the way down the rabbit hole and
Wow.
started my healing continued. I was healed enough to write the first book, but it was very surface level. The second book goes deeper because I did more work. We always have to get to the root of a matter for us to
Yeah.
pull that root up to really see the healing. So that's why it's called grief work is essential, because during the pandemic time, we were faced with essential workers. Some of us, I was an essential worker at the time because I was continuing to work. So it's not an option, as most people think. We must do our grief work.
Right. Wonderful. And so, what are some of the common challenges that people need to face and work on individually so that they can actually do the grief work and get the result out of the process?
Mhm. Being willing to make time for themselves.
Uh huh.
That's a part of the grief work. I think two things that I run into that's challenging working with, especially people of faith, but even minority people, is debunking myths. There are a
Ah,
lot of limiting beliefs that are holding us hostage. Yeah, so recognizing that, helping the person to do that, and then providing them with a roadmap for them that is custom for them to do the work. Because in the beginning, I was really wearing myself out, Andy, because I was wanting a person's recovery more than they wanted it. So I had to step back
yeah.
and learn and realize that healing and recovery is not for those who need it, it's for those who want it. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
Uh, that is powerful. That is
yeah.
powerful. I love it. I love it. We have been listening to Dr. Tonya Cunningham, Finding Clarity in Grief, Effective Strategies for Healing and Relief. Remember, We are live on Facebook and YouTube, LBW Radio Network, also our app. So you can listen and you can also listen. And please support our studios, support our program, support our people. Click the follow, click the like, click the notification bell so that you can keep in tune and in touch with us as we continue to bring this information and this knowledge for you as we continue with Dr. Tonya Cunningham in the house. So, as you look at your life and you look at your career, could you
Mhm.
recall for us any highlights, any moment that stands out for you for the past 12 years or so since you've begun this amazing journey? Is something that you just can't forget and you always seem to remember when you think about the highlights of your career thus far?
We just mentioned a couple of them is writing books. You know, I
Uh-huh.
again I stated I was 47 when I started on this journey, and the fact that I've written more than two books now has just been a great highlight of the
Yes.
connections I've made. Because
Uh-huh.
I was a pastor's wife, I use that example. I thought I wasn't going to have any more pastors' wives friends, and I have a larger network of pastors' wives friends, and I'm not a pastor's wife.
Right.
So I'm really surprised and excited about just the network that I have and the influence. I'm humbled by that. I definitely don't take it lightly that I'm
Mm-hmm.
recognized as a person who, like you said, has the expertise not only from a clinical standpoint going to school, but from a personal experience. And that's the
Right.
part, believe it or not, Andy, that's pulling the people in because I share my story and it teaches
Yeah.
them like, oh my gosh, okay, she's real. She hurts.
Mm,
Absolutely.
yeah.
All of us do.
Yeah.
All of us do.
Yes.
And that has been a highlight
Yes.
for me as well.
Wonderful. And I love it when people can keep it real and see that the human experience is one that is available for everybody. When you
Yes,
have that embodiment and you couple it with that clinical stuff and it goes out there, it's so powerful, so dynamic.
yes.
It resonates with people. They feel the reality of it because it's your story, it's your reality.
That's right.
Wow,
Hmm.
amazing. I love it. Thank you so much for sharing. In terms of the dynamic way in which you maintain yourself and keep you grounded, what would you say are the key factors for giving you the drive, the commitment, the resilience that have kept you going, and now you are a vessel that God is using to help so many people with
Hmm.
their grief challenges? What keeps you grounded? What keeps you centered?
Resting.
Ah,
Resting. It sounds so simple, but
yeah.
can be so complicated for many of us
Wow.
who pour out what I call teach. You're helping others. Um,
Yes.
in this journey, I've learned a lot, and not just about the grief, but about our bodies and how our body responds to stress and things like that. And I've really learned on a greater level that rest is such a spiritual principle. A lot of times in
Yes.
scripture, you'll find Jesus would pull away from the crowd to rest.
Yeah.
So I've learned that my rest regimen is a non negotiable. There's certain things that I must do, and there's certain there are many types of rest. You know, you have social, mental, emotional rest. So I would think that would be the thing that has really helped to keep me grounded. And of course, for me, without saying, Holy Spirit does that. He is my anchor, my rock. But in the natural, it would be learning to rest, and that helps me to get restored, to get rejuvenated, to be able to do what He has called me to do.
Wow. Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. Wonderful. Thank you
Mhm.
for sharing. We appreciate that. We appreciate you. What advice, Dr. Tanya, would you give to someone who feels stuck in their grief and they don't know for sure what's the next step, what's the next move to take going forward? They need help.
Mhm.
Probably don't
Mhm.
even know how to ask for that help. How would you
Mhm.
approach dealing with that individual?
I would definitely encourage you to let you know that you're not the only one who feels this way. So do not allow grief to isolate you because it can be isolating, even if you're in a room full of people. But recognize that there's nothing wrong with you. Most often, I find people say, is this the correct way to grieve? Is something wrong with me? So I would encourage them to know that they're not alone. And then number two, be open. Be open. What do I mean by that? Be open to new perspectives, a new
Okay.
way of doing things. My eldest client at one point, he started out at 89 and he just died at the top of this year. I think he's about 92, Hispanic male.
Wow.
Hispanic
Yeah.
culture is similar to the Black community, sweep things under the rug and all of that. His wife died. And as a result of that, because he was taught men don't cry, and so he suppressed it all, and it went to his cells in his body, and it gave him it caused him to be temporarily paralyzed for a moment.
Wow.
And so for
Yeah.
him, he came back and he went to the ER, but he came back and said, "Young lady, I'm going to apply. I don't know if you can teach this old dog new tricks, but I'm going to apply all this information that you're sharing," because he was dying of a broken heart. That is a real diagnosis,
Yes.
because he
Yes.
suppressed the grief on the inside. That man thrived from 89 to 92. He thrived because he was open. He was afraid, but he was open to doing things differently and applied all of the information that I shared. So he taught me now that we can change if we want to. We just have to do the work as long as there's no cognitive deficit going on. But any of us can change, because I hear a lot of people say, that's just the way I am. That's the way you're choosing to be. It's a choice.
It's a choice.
It's a
Wow.
choice.
Yeah.
Recovery is a choice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. I love that. I love that. Amazing. Wonderful. As you speaking there, I'm thinking about sports, and I'm thinking also about food. And you mentioned the word holistic several times as we address body, mind, and spirit. In
Mhm.
any of your treatment, do you recommend a more balanced life for someone, that is enough sleep, enough recreation, sporting, and also dieting? How can these things, if any way at all, help or promote their person's ability to manage themselves while facing grief?
Absolutely. I start my assessment by asking them questions. When was the last time you've been to the doctor? Have you had a
Yeah,
physical? If they have not, I require all clients go to the doctor, get a physical. Well, I'm not sick. Yes, you are. Your heart is sick. I
yeah,
said, go tell them that you had a major loss, have your blood work drawn, have them do a full, complete panel, test your thyroid, your hormones, vitamin D. And they said, well, I came here for grief. I said, I am helping you with your grief because it's your body. So in the
yes,
beginning, once I asked them those questions, then we moved to the emotionality of grief. Well, once we
right,
get along on that journey, then I circle back around and deal with the physical part, because mentally and emotionally, they're not able to stop, whatever it is that's going on in their body as far as the food. But once you get
yeah,
on that grief journey, now, okay, now we got to deal with that food that you're putting in your body, because our
mm,
food is fuel. If you
yeah,
pour fuel in your car is going to function poorly.
yeah,
Same thing with the food, especially in the world that we live in today with pesticides. We must give attention to our food. One of the things that I encourage people to stop, I want to share with your audience, if you are consuming dairy, you want to stop it, because dairy causes
wow,
inflammation in the body. So a lot of the sicknesses that we're experiencing, high blood pressure, cholesterol, cancer, all of those things are related to and can be related to unaddressed grief and our poor diet.
wow. This is
Mhm.
such a beautiful learning experience. There is so much, and I hope our people are getting it, and those who are going to be seeing this later really appreciate the wonderful and amazing stuff that we are sharing today. I want to draw
Hmm.
another practical scenario. I like keeping it real. I have
Yes.
seen people go to championship games where their country or their team is playing, and they're so confident that their team is going to win, but somebody throws up a Hail Mary pass, the quarterback, a three pointer, a last minute penalty, a free kick, and suddenly all the hype is gone, and
Hmm.
they go home and they are so depressed. They are grieving because of a sudden loss.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I've heard situations in the World Cup where people would have even committed suicide because their
Hmm.
side may have lost the final. I think it happened sometime with Brazil. Have you had the
Hmm.
experience of dealing with anyone who, in sports or athletics or anything where there's competitive physical activities taking place, they lost in the last minute and they just can't seem to get over it? How do you help
Hmm.
them deal with it?
Yeah. Yes. That's called disenfranchised grief.
Okay.
That is the kind of grief that's not socially sanctioned. So people who don't understand when people are experiencing grief, they'll say it was just a game. Get over it. No.
Huh.
As I stated earlier, every loss demands a response. So I
Right.
encourage that person to lean into grief. You're going through grief, and that's valid. There's nothing wrong with you. A lot of people say, am I crazy for feeling this way? Absolutely not. So it's that education and awareness piece to say you're in grief. Now, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to allow yourself to feel so that you can heal? Because grief shared is grief diminished. The more you talk about it, the more the pain of grief diminishes. I see it quite often. Yeah, that disenfranchised grief. It happens when celebrities or someone popular that we've never met, but they die. Who was my R&B singer that just recent? Frankie Beverly and
Yeah.
Mays. Frankie Beverly just died. Talking about grief. Never met the man
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
person, but his music spoke to me. And so as a result of his death, the automatic response is I grieve and I
Yeah.
mourn him.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Frankie Beverly and Mays. Classic.
Yes,
For
classic.
me personally, I remember I was on a field playing a game, and a, a, a brother by the name of Ricky, he said, "Guys, I have something to tell you." Like, we're in the middle of a game, dude. What's up with you? You see, you won't believe this, but I just got it on my phone that Kobe is no longer with us,
Yeah, yeah,
and it was as if the oxygen was sucked out of everybody. You're like, what?
absolutely. Hmm.
Check again, dude. Check again. You're sure?
Yep, yep.
Something not something right about that. It's just you just we couldn't believe it. We couldn't understand it. We couldn't
Hmm.
process it. We couldn't wrap our minds around it. And
Yep,
ever so often I'm just reminded of the greatness of the guy and the gift that he was at the time that he was, and gone at
absolutely.
43 or 44. But
Yep.
it created that kind of impact, and there was an immediate vacuum that
Yes.
existed as a result. And we took some time to get over that one.
And that
It
was
was
grief.
yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Grief swept over you all. Yeah. I
yes.
remember I'm not even a sports fan like that, but I was
Uh-huh.
sitting in church and I got a text and I started crying. I'm like, oh my gosh, for the very same
Yeah,
reasons you did, the impact that
yeah,
he had
yeah.
on
Yes.
others and our community. So that's
Wow.
called disenfranchised grief.
Now I know, and now the audience knows. So I'm just
Hmm.
gonna put up some information here on the board, and
Hmm.
I want you to tell folks how is the most effective and efficient way they can make contact with you should they need your services.
Hmm.
Make your core competencies available to them, and of course, your publications.
Yes. They can find all of those publications on my website, It's TonyaCMinistries.com. You can certainly go there. You can find them there. I offer also complimentary discovery sessions, 15 minutes in length, and just see what I can do to help you discover where you need to go, what you need to do. If you need to be with me, or maybe I can connect you with a colleague to help put you on the path of healing. And I'm also on social media. I'm on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok. I encourage you to go there and like and follow, because I provide lots of content. So some people will say, I can't afford therapy. I say that you can afford not to have it. But until you get to that space, go to my social media page, because I provide a lot of content there.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. I'm just gonna leave that up there a minute, so
Okay.
that folks can see it. You know, there's a saying that some of us gravitate to sometimes, and I have debunked it a long time ago. That big men don't cry, and I can't remember exactly when it was, but someone once told me when you cry, you release and you give yourself a sense of relief. But
Mhm.
he said not only that, the tears are a symbol of the hurt or the pain that you may be feeling that you're willing to let go. And it
Right.
is better to let it flow down your cheeks where you can wipe the scars away than keep it on the inside where you may not be able to see the scars that are developing there. And you spoke a lot
Mm.
about people being able to release and relief, especially if they can speak more about it. But how
Mhm.
important is that aspect of breaking down and just letting your emotions hang out and cry even if you have to?
Mhm. You just said it well. It allows that release, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and chemically. There's something that happens with our tears. Again, it's a
Yeah,
releasing. It helps the chemical or the hormone, dopamine and oxytocin. It helps those happy, feel good moments, hormones to release, versus having this buildup of cortisol, the stress hormone, and things like that.
yeah,
So it is very important that, and know that many people fear allowing themselves to release in that manner, because they don't know what will happen afterwards. Some people say, "Oh my gosh, I don't know if I won't be able to stop crying." I say, "You will stop crying when it's time for you to stop crying. In the meantime, allow those tears to flow, because such healing and recovery are in those tears."
yeah. It's amazing as you're speaking. I remember a friend of mine who lost her husband, and in the funeral, when I went up to hug her, she said, "Andy, don't hug me. I don't have any more tears." I ran out of tears, and she just didn't know how to respond anymore. She was just like, all
Absolutely.
it's all out
Yes,
there.
that's
The
right.
ducks are dry. They just can't keep
Mm-hmm.
coming anymore. We just
Mm-hmm.
have about a minute and about 45 seconds, Dr. Tony, and I'd like you to take most of it to just tell folks anything at all that you think is of significance that we should know, that we should hear from you. Parting
Mm-hmm.
words, parting statement of inspiration, encouragement that you can say to them that you know it's necessary that they hear, that we
Mm-hmm.
all hear.
That's right. I want to encourage you to let you know that it is never too late to start on your healing journey. And I definitely speak to those who are older, as well as those who are younger, but those who are older, take that time to exercise self care and allow yourself to feel those emotions and address any unaddressed grief, hurt, and pain, so that you can live what I call this pain free life. There is life after loss, it is just a different one, and get the proper help to help you navigate this space effectively.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. And on
Mhm.
that glorious note, we have come to the end of this amazing broadcast, this wonderful program, this episode of Breaking Out of Depression. We have been in the presence of Dr. Tonya Cunningham, and she's been sharing wonderful tidbits and information on how to get clarity and the strategies for healing and relief as far as dealing with grief is concerned. This is going to be aired later on at 6:30 p.m. Well, we're going to begin the broadcast at 6:30, but this is going to be aired from 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you want a second dose, they say if it's nice, you do it twice. I say sometimes if it's twice, you do it thrice. But, we're going to be there on the LBW Radio Network later on. We thank you for staying with us. And I'll put up the information one more time that you can see where you can reach out to Dr. Tonya and get that free assessment, but also get the opportunity to have a chat with her. Spend time with her if you can. Get her copies of her books and continue to increase your ability and your knowledge to help all of us deal with some level of grief that we may have experienced from time to time in this life.
True.
So until next time, this is Andy, your host, and together with my guest, Dr. Tonya Cunningham, saying so long, Godspeed, God bless.